Okay, I can cut the laughs out.
Don't even bother. Just leave the talking. Smooth. Like peanut butter. All right. Welcome back to Fkthry Presents The Pod Zone. Or at least I am Mike Zone, and this is Joel Pod.
My name is Joel Pod. That is correct. So what are we going to talk about today, Mike?
Well, it sounds like we're about to do some mild interviewing in order to reestablish who we are so our viewers know who we are to be telling them anything.
Yes. I figured it would be good to kind of go back and tell each of our individual stories as we got involved in music. Because something I was actually looking on Facebook, and we met in 2016. So that's only been summer of 2016.
So we only met then, or was that just when we became Facebook friends?
Well, I think that is when we met, because I've been wondering when it was, like which show, because I remember it was after Porter Robinson. And I think that was the time we did the Porter Robinson show.
Right.
And it would have been like summer 2016. So.
Yeah, it's always hard to remember for some reason. And I think that makes sense because, I came to Van for a bunch of shows, but I swear I met you before that because I used to stay over at the house a couple times. Like, I've stayed over because, like, Lou would let me stay there.
Maybe I did meet you before Porter. I'm trying to think.
It's tough to say because I do remember that one of the first days that we hung out was, you walked by us on the street in Vancouver and said hi, and then we randomly, me and my ex, we just like randomly bumped into each other, and then we ended up going over to your place.
I think I remember that, yeah.
Yeah,
and that would have been around 2016 because I think I moved to Vancouver in 2015, so that would have been. And then,
then definitely.
So I think it was 2016, summer of 2016, because I would have moved the year before that. So I spent a year in Vancouver, which totally makes sense because I remember that old place on Harwood. That was remember my studio back then was like just the corner of the kitchen. I just convinced Lou to let me set up. It was literally just the saddest thing.
Yeah, that was good.
It was so tucked away. I still had that piano. I just had piano and 2 HS8s and the computer, and that was about it.
Man, things have changed.
Yeah, I didn't even have a computer. I think I bought it. I made my computer not even.
When I met you, you were using a laptop.
Yeah,
that was a MacBook, and you were on Logic.
Yeah, because so 2015 I would have been still on Logic Pro, and just using that Akai EIE. I think of my
oh no,
the gear I used to record is kind of like the era using Akai EIE, and I also had like Shure SH50 headphones before that. They were even worse than my M50s I have now. But yeah, oh my god, that EIE, I still have it, but it died so bad. Remember, it would just change the sample rate all the time?
Oh, dude, that thing was a nightmare. It was literally like your computer would just crash like every 10 minutes or whatever. You'd have to like restart it, like close Ableton, and
it's a pretty bad. It's a pretty bad piece of kit. So, I wouldn't recommend anybody buy them. They look cool because they have VU meters, which is why I was like, wow, I want to get that. They got like analog VU meters that move when the volume comes in. But oh my god, dude, it's
not worth it.
Because Akai is actually not terrible. Like the APCs I have are, as from controller perspective, Akai's good, but not from an interface perspective. Don't get the EIE.
Yeah, it's weird. I guess you'd expect them to do it, but at the same time, it seems like the brands that do things really well are way more focused on just that side of things. Like Native Instruments doesn't really make like sound cards. Like they have some, but they don't really make sound cards. Like Apollo does, or like AUD. Is it AUD?
Apollo.
Apollo 20.
Are you talking about?
It's not
I know who you're talking about, but it's not.
Yeah, the Apollo stuff, the good interface. Oh my god, why can't I even remember these right now? I'm pretty sure it's AD.
Audient? No, it's not Audient,
No,
right? It's the brand that made Apollo, right?
Yeah. I can't even spell Apollo.
Just type in Apollo.
Universal Auto. Yeah, Universal Audio. Yeah,
UAD. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
We both had a brain fart right there.
Yeah, that was bad. Anyway, so yeah, they don't make like MIDI controllers. They only make interfaces. PreSonus doesn't make a MIDI controller.
Yeah.
You know,
They make a DAW, which I've tried.
Studio One.
It's kind of trash.
Well, they should stick to making interfaces.
It's not the worst thing in the world. It's very much similar to a Logic workflow, but yeah,
there's a lot of DAWs out there that you wouldn't even really realize. Like a lot of interfaces come with some sort of DAW, but the UAD stuff, I'm pretty sure it comes with Pro Tools, so that's why it's.
You got to feel so bad for those developers. They're like, they're working on a DAW, and they just know that it's not that good.
Not
so
gonna
like
be used
all day long. They're just like writing it. It's like the free software that you get with. I guess it doesn't matter if you're having fun, but
if you're just starting out, like you need somewhere to go, So
yeah, that
it's better. It's probably more beneficial for them to spend their time like creating a DAW that just like works, so that if someone buys an interface, they don't have to also go buy Pro Tools or whatever else. At least that way, like people will be more inclined to just go spend money buying an interface if they know that they're going to be able to use it right away if they're just starting out.
Yeah, it's probably the biggest thing that's gotten rid of those is GarageBand, just because it's such a competent DAW for being like completely free with every Mac. And most people I know, at least in the last 10 years, everybody creative that does music has a Mac. So it's like, okay, well, you just get a DAW for free no matter what.
You just get a DAW.
You get a DAW. Except for Windows users.
No, Windows users do not. Actually, and that's really funny. I might get to that story later, depending on your questions, but Windows does actually come with a DAW. It's just not very good.
Really? Okay, well, we'll leave that for later. Do you want to start asking me questions or vice versa?
Okay, so, well, why don't I start asking you that? I think that's a better idea.
Sure, yeah. I don't think mine will be quite as long because...
Well, that's exactly. So that's I don't want to like take forever and then you don't even have time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we'll just start there. Okay, yeah. So we're going way back. I'm curious. Like, what was your actual first like memory of listening to music and like experiencing it? Do you remember way back then? And like, what was that music? What were your parents showing you?
Yeah. So I would have to say that. I think I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm not the norm, but I have very bad specific memory going back even a couple years. So I honestly don't even remember, like, because I can barely even remember the time that we met. Like, I remember specifics, but not times very well. What I can remember, though, is like, I can remember kind of general things from my childhood. And something that was always pretty prevalent, I would say, like a really, really young age, is I would basically just hum music to myself that I would, not other people's songs. I would be literally making up a song in my head, just on the fly per se. Like I'd be like writing a melody in my head kind of thing. And I would be visualizing that in my head. So I don't know if that's normal, but I always kind of felt like I had musical ideas in my head, even at a really early age. Like I'd say probably when I was 7 and 8, I used to really, I'd have just kind of things being generated in my head per se, and I would just be kind of thinking about it, which is kind of what I do now when I write. I just think of like whatever comes to my head and then I write it down. But in terms of kind of outside of my head and influences, my mom isn't musical really that much. It's funny, probably the most music that we listened to repeatedly was the Big Shiny Tunes and like the Now 17 CDs.
Wow. Okay.
And we used to have like an old CD player. I did listen to cassettes before, but those were mainly like children's storybooks. But I did have a cassette player briefly. I remember that.
All right.
But the songs that I would say were the ones that are like I can actually remember were like Big Shiny Tunes and
wow.
And what's the other one? And Now. And we had like every single CD. And I just remember.
Oh, you had a lot of them. It wasn't just like one CD. You like had the whole collection.
The whole thing. Yeah. And I remembered knowing like which songs I liked. And I would like go find the one I wanted, throw it in the CD, and then skip to the right track. So at my mom's side, so my parents are divorced, but at my mom's side, that was mainly what we listened to early on. But it wasn't like my mom just had those CDs. It wasn't really like there was a specific influence. And then on my dad's side, he is an IT guy. So he actually ran a file server. Like I do now, and he has all the MP3s because that was back in the Napster days, and we listened to every single Disney song. Like we had every single Disney soundtrack, so that's definitely ingrained in my brain quite a bit. We would have like all the audio files, yeah. And on my dad's side, it was always Winamp. I don't know if you ever used that.
Yeah, I know of. I remember. It's very, very deep in my memory. I think I remember like what it used to look like.
It's the old Windows back on XP. I mean, you still had to download it, but I remember all the different skins. I'd be messing around with the skins and everything.
Yeah. I totally did that too.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of Winamp, a lot of now Big Shiny Tunes. Listen to a lot of Disney, a lot of ABBA, but this is all early enough that I wouldn't say that it formed anything too specific in my brain. So I mean, that's really all I can say from a early on phase. I did also take piano lessons when I was 5, which was really important, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're saying that you don't really even remember the music you were listening to when you were that age, but you do remember taking piano lessons, then your first experience wasn't even of listening to music, it was more of playing it.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, my piano lessons were very basic. I only spent 3 years. So you don't get
a while.
Yeah, but it's not too in depth. Basically, you know, I learned, I think up to like Peccable Canon. I don't even know how to pronounce it anymore, but like I could play that.
That's funny. I played that too.
Yeah, and it was good, I think, for training my ears to hear, because I really can hear melodies and harmonies really well now. Pardon me?
Peccable Canon. That's how you say it.
Peccable.
Yeah, so go on, you melodies. I remember them.
Yeah, so I think that definitely, I wouldn't say that, because I play piano now too, although that's a bit of a lie because I can't perform it live. I mean, I probably could if I practiced a bunch, but it's more from as a writing tool.
Okay.
But I think it's probably the most important instrument when it comes to how I perceive melody, harmony, and all that stuff. Because I think it's because I started at such an early age writing with it and playing and, you know, just playing 3 chords, like 1, 3, 5, that kind of stuff. So I definitely, that's for me when I approach most songs, then that's kind of probably why I start with harmony as well. But from an early age, I think that always kind of influenced me.
Cool. Okay. It's funny. I was just looking at the Big Shiny Tunes, some of the lists of music on those, and it's funny because to me, I'm like, Big Shiny Tunes, I'm like, that's so dumb, but like at the same time, like those CDs had all of the songs that everybody remembers from that era.
Exactly.
So it's like you learned all of the main stuff. So like when you go to a club, you probably know like every song.
I know.
Like,
I know all.
if it's top 40 stuff, like you'd probably like. They've got some heavy stuff. They got Marilyn Manson on number 2. That's crazy.
Yeah, dude. Just one sec. You're kind of cutting out in TeamSpeak. Can you just disconnect and reconnect?
Oh yeah, for sure. Okay.
Or maybe if you're on the VPN, kill that.
Oh yeah. Okay. I'll do that. Hold on.
So a specific song. What you were asking is there a specific song that I can remember first?
Yeah. No. Just like what was your first favorite song? Like if you remember way back, like whatever. What did you hear that was like, fuck yeah, I really like this. Like what was it?
Well, so what's funny is the answer is Eminem, Lose Yourself. That's the first song, which is hilarious because that's not an older song or a new song. But I heard that.
Dude, that's old. That's old for sure because I was in elementary school when that shit was big. I was in like grade 7 and you're younger than I am. So that's like definitely around the time when I was starting to even notice music.
And
so
that's,
for sure.
Yeah, so that's when I would say that I was really starting to notice it. So there's probably a gap between, like, I listened to lots of music that like when I played piano back then, my parents kind of just let us play things, and that was like from age 5 to 6, and then I think from like ages 7 to like 11 or 12 or 13, I didn't really care, and I don't really have any memories about music. The reason for that is because I was dealing with being a child, and I was just, there's other things that you're thinking about, and then I remember starting to get kind of back into it when I got an iPod and iTunes, and that was really what started it. And the first song I got on iTunes was Lose Yourself, and I remember being like, this is so sick. Like, just, I know every single word to that song. Obviously, it's like pretty interesting, pretty important song culturally for like a lot of people.
Oh yeah, it was huge. It was a huge song.
Which is funny because to me, it doesn't affect me at all anymore. I mean, I like it, but Eminem is not one. All the music I liked back then, it doesn't actually really affect me anymore, I don't think.
Oh yeah, 100%. I feel that too. There are definitely songs that I used to really love, and like they're still nostalgic to me in a certain way. And some of them I still do love, but there are a lot of things that I used to love that I listen to it now and I'm like, what?
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah. So for me, it started in iTunes when iTunes came out. So I listened to, hilariously enough, Nickelback, Linkin Park, all that kind of stuff. And that would have been in 2008-ish. Listened to like pretty much all the standard poppy stuff around then. And that was me basically first getting into music. I wouldn't say I got too much into rock or punk. It was more just pop and hip hop, and just generally poppy stuff. Yeah.
That's funny you mentioned Nickelback and Linkin Park. Those are kind of like on the heavier side of pop as a kid, for sure.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
People laugh at Nickelback right now, and it's kind of funny, and it's like I laugh at them because I feel like their music is sort of like it's too literal for me, and that's I think this is a problem, is that it like comes across almost like country music, and it's just like so sad boy, but it's like trying to be heavy, so it's like the message doesn't really fit the sound of the music. But the thing about Nickelback, man, is that whoever's mixing that music is fucking genius.
Oh yeah,
that music is mixed perfectly. It sounds so good.
Yeah, it's
no
nuts.
idea.
Yeah.
How do you achieve that? So yeah, Nickelback sounds amazing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's nothing, but they sound kind of heavy too, because they've got a pretty fat distorted guitar thing going on. Like, so as a kid, that's kind of heavy. So did you like Linkin Park and stuff, or do you even like, or was it just kind of a random name you threw out?
I still like Linkin Park today. I wouldn't say that I've listened to a song from them in the last year. That being said, there are classics that I still have. I have my playlists from, so when I created iTunes, I've never lost those playlists. I actually still have those. So I actually have them just as, a list of MP3 files in my file system, and I will go back and I'll listen to that era of my folders essentially. And I can't listen to it for too long just because a lot of that kind of stuff is, from my opinion, pretty shallow or just not that interesting because my tastes have moved on. But yeah, no, Linkin Park definitely for me is one of the ones that I still really like. But I don't like the songs that you would probably think I like. I don't really like the meme or the more popular ones. There's some of the less popular ones that I like. They're actually the heavier ones, like Bleed It Out is I really like that song.
Word. Yeah, that was one of their newer ones that came out after the first two albums. That was on their second one.
It's pretty screamy too, which is one.
Yeah, I actually no offense, I hate that song because they played it so many times on the radio that when I was working, I had to hear it like 100 times a day. Like, I swear to God, it was on like it was on once every time there was a show. So the shows were once every hour. So every hour I would hear it Bleed It Out at least once or twice, and that was a problem.
I didn't realize it was that popular.
It was big. Bleed it out, digging deeper just to throw it away. I heard that hard so many times.
So I've never listened to the radio for an extended period of time in my entire life. So it's probably the most thing that I'm most sheltered about. I curated playlists from the day when I started actually getting music. That's when we still listen to music, but I started with CDs and my dad's music that was stored in folders as well. So really not a lot of radio for me.
Yeah, me neither, except for when I worked. And that's the thing, is I think anyone who works in a small enough environment where you can hear the radio most of the time, like clearly, like, so anyone who works night shift in a small restaurant or like in retail, anywhere that listens to actual radio, they will probably sympathize with the fact that you get really bored of music really quick, like, and you start looking for your own. Like, those people actually had a taste in music, whereas like people who don't listen to music or don't have to listen to the radio, like, they just don't bother searching for it. They just get what the radio gives you. Yeah. And they're fine with it.
Because they're not having to listen to it every hour or on the hour kind of thing.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so that's cool. You no songs actually come to mind, but I got a little bit of an idea of what your music taste is. The next thing I was going to ask is, when did you first play an instrument? But you said you took piano lessons when you were 5, so
like
that answers
5 to 8, yeah. But then...
And that was...
Sorry,
go ahead.
But then I would say, in terms of actually seriously playing an instrument that affects me now, is guitar. And I picked that up when I was like 14. I bought a Fender Strat, and that's been with me writing wise forever now.
Gotcha. Okay. And then, so these are, a lot of these questions are really about firsts, because I'm just curious about, I guess firsts are marking the milestones at least. So I'm trying to figure out like where the music began. So the next thing is, what was your first experience with music production? Like, when did that start? Yeah.
So I would say kind of the phase when I actually started caring about music was as soon as I got iTunes and I started being able to collect it. What happened then is I started making playlists. And from then I started my interest started to grow. I started to explore, got into deadmau5, because obviously I come from an entirely electronic producing background. I was always interested in analog instruments like guitar and piano, but I never thought about using them to write per se. I just kind of thought it was fun to play guitar, or thought it was fun to play piano. So kind of was making playlists, got into electronic music, obviously started with Deadmau5. That's just the way it is. So he's obviously a pretty big influence. And as I made more and more playlists, I kind of started to realize that I wanted to write music as well a little bit. I was kind of, I that sound in my head where I'd hear parts of songs kind of going places. I was like, oh, maybe I can also write my own stuff. So that's when I got into like GarageBand very briefly. And back then I was on a Mac, so I had a MacBook. Used GarageBand for a bit, and that was probably just like super basic stuff. But pretty quickly moved to Logic Pro. That was back when it was Logic Pro 9, and that's when I started producing. And that would have been, I actually still have these on my SoundCloud, so let me just bring it up. I'll tell you exactly when I did it. If I can find it here. Oh, I wonder I probably don't have to scroll down too far. But that would have been the start. And it was, honestly, there's not even a genre to it. It was just me writing whatever came to my mind. And obviously, when you start in electronic production, you really just spend a whole lot of time doing random things and not having any idea what's going on, and be like, oh, what does this knob do? Oh, what does this knob do? And I didn't have the slightest idea what a compressor was. So 8 years ago is when I started producing. My oldest track on SoundCloud is 8 years old. It's called Decisions of a Dog.
2012.
Yeah. So that's
really?
right. And I went and saw Deadmau5 in 2011. So basically a year after, or 8 years ago, it's on the stream video. And my comment is feedback, please! ! That is
no.
Well, maybe we'll play that at some point. But wow, that song is. I had no idea about anything.
Yeah. That's that's hilarious. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you afterwards. I don't know if I want to share it publicly, but it's one of those ones where fair. Obviously I understood how songs should be structured from like a subconscious level, but I listened to Deadmau5, listened to Strobe and all that stuff, but I had no idea like what gain was or all like what the level limiting was, and it was just like distorting really bad, and then the drops like quieter than the build, like so many terrible things that are just
And that's so common, actually. I feel like a lot of people have that issue when they first start making music, is that the build is always louder than the drop.
Yeah, and I can't really say too much about it, but I did basically consistently write music since 8 years ago electronically. So if I scroll through my stuff, basically I have songs going up. I've got one from 5 years ago, like 5, 6, 7 years ago. I've got tracks basically going all the way back, but none of that stuff I'm really proud of at all. And it was all made in Logic, which is probably the root cause. And I didn't know very much. But yeah. So 2012 would have been when I started, which is crazy to think about. And I had no tools at that point. So I had a guitar. I don't even know if I had a guitar back then, but didn't have a piano because I'd only played as a kid, but I didn't have a digital piano or anything. So everything was just keyboard and mouse.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, wow. It's very different. It's very, very opposite. So many things are opposite to my experience, but it's very interesting to hear how that all came about.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I was going to ask is what is it about making music that keeps you doing it?
So I think at first it was, when I first started doing it, I liked the idea of just like making a song, and it was pretty shallow at first. I was like, oh, I want to be able to like make a song because I looked up to these artists that I listened to, and I wanted to be kind of cool at first. That's kind of what I thought about. But kind of as it's gone on, I think that for me, what's most interesting is, and what I've kind of realized is, but often I've got all this gear now. I'm surrounded by a whole studio. I won't write for like a week and a half. But then when I do, it's really important, and I just crank something out. So it's almost like looping full circle. When I was talking about how I have like a song in my head, I don't always have it in my head, but when I do, I want to be able to basically just sit down and do it, because that song is like, or that song or that sound or whatever it is, it's kind of tied to some emotion I'm having, and then the process of getting it down and creating something physical with it, that's super therapeutic. So I think that's kind of what it's become. At first I just wanted to be kind of cool, and I wanted to be like, oh, look at Deadmau5, that's so interesting, I want to be able to write electronic music. But now for me, it's more of just kind of an expressive thing. It's kind of like a release. So yeah, even like now I won't write for an extended period of time, or, you know, a week or so, but I find that within almost every week or week and a half, I always need to do something musical in terms of actually writing, because I'm always listening to music. You know, I probably spend an hour and a half a day listening to new music when I'm really getting into stuff. I can get pretty tired of it sometimes, but yeah, these days it's writing is more of a release, and it's just something that I feel like I need to do.
That is something that we do share in common then. And I think that's honestly, it makes sense that most people probably started music that way. I don't think many people, actually, I don't know, I can't speak to anybody else, but I feel like a lot of people would have been sold the idea of like this, you know, get rich and famous rock star, cool person lifestyle. You know, everybody loves the cool musician. Like, it's always portrayed in everything you'd see is like some cool person playing music. And it is cool when people are really, really good at music. It's fucking great. It's so cool. It's one of the coolest things you can do is like sit down and like shred on an instrument and not even hit a bad note at all, and like, you know, make everybody happy. But yeah, so I feel like I was sold on that idea as well. And then the same thing, it's almost as if we start making music like selfishly for external reasons, meaning like I'm making it so that other people will think I'm cool. You know, like I'm doing it because I want other people to increase my value and my image. As opposed to later when you start doing it for yourself internally, as in you just do it for yourself, truly. Yeah,
and I wouldn't say that it's entirely for myself. I also, for me, the most important thing about music is the fact that it can connect to other people. So obviously, when I write, I'm trying to write something that's super unique to what I like. I'm trying to just pull it right out of my brain, so it's very personal, but at the same time I still want it to then relate to other people, and it's really important to me that other people can enjoy it as well. So it's very much a personal thing, but at the same time as I also love to share it. So it's still fun to have stuff get posted out and see how people react to it. Yeah,
no doubt. It's I think that the motive just comes from a different direction, as opposed to you wanting other people to like it so that you feel better about yourself. It's more like you want to like it so that other people also like it, and everybody feels good.
Yeah, and it's like connection too. Like even like these days I get pretty abstract into things where it's not even per se something that I like. It's just interesting, or it's weird, and it's tickling some part of my brain that I wouldn't listen to this regularly, but it's like ambient music or like Foley and stuff. Like I like listening to that sometimes. I find it I wouldn't say that it's good, but it's interesting, and sometimes I can like to listen to that. So, and there's some music that sounds really painful to your ears, but it's, there's some part of it that's interesting. So I like that aspect as well.
Yeah, the range of like how we even define what music is so broad these days, like going all the way to like noise music, really. Like,
yeah, what was that artist that we listened to?
Hannah Tarash.
Oh yeah, that is a can of worms. That we probably shouldn't open.
We're not going to open it right now, but if anyone wants to look it up, it's like Hannah, Hanatarash, I believe.
Yeah.
Hannah Tarash.
And probably turn down your volume before you play.
Yeah, turn down your volume.
Yeah, definitely do that.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, that gives me a lot of information.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, yeah, you were inspired by some artists. And eventually you found a way to be able to make music, using your skills. And now you keep doing it because you've gotten to a point where you like it, and it's actually like producing good results, which is nice. There's nothing like sucking. And I mean, you're totally right. Like, yeah, of course you definitely start doing it more for yourself. But what is music if not to share it with other people? And I feel like you need to do that in order to like try to connect people to a deeper part of yourself that can't be explained with words, which is like if they are into music that you created and you also like it because you were able to fulfill your own necessities for like creating that piece of music, then you will feel more connected to them because it feels like they kind of understand or at least enjoy a part of you that you like.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a very raw and pure way to express yourself, essentially. And I think for me, it's more interesting than other mediums, but I think that also kind of comes down to my brain. Obviously, I'm really driven by melody, harmony, and those kind of things because I've gotten more and more into complex, more jazz melodies and harmonies and note arrangements, and as well as just music as well. Which is why, pictures, I'm not as much into like photography. I still am interested in that, but for me, music is definitely like hearing is just by far the most interesting thing for me because it's just.
Yeah, you really experience it in a different way. And I think a lot of that. Go ahead.
It's almost just unexplainable. It's just, and that's why a lot of times when you're trying to talk about music, it's like you need you need to use metaphors because you can't even explain why it has this effect.
Yeah, totally. What I was going to add to that is just that music, unlike art, is something that happens that requires time to experience. Like time is part of the medium.
Yeah.
So because of that, and because it's, if it's music with a rhythm, then it's time that is, predictable and synchronized. And so in that moment when you're experiencing listening to it with someone else, you're both synchronizing to a constant clock source, which it really does make you feel a lot more in sync with the people around you who are also experiencing it, especially if they are enjoying it the same way that you're enjoying it. So it's almost like you can't really compare music to like a picture as much as you could maybe compare music to like
film.
Going to a movie. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Which is funny because films rely heavily on audio as well, but that's a whole that's a whole nother thing. But no, I think that's a really good comparison that I wasn't even thinking about, but really, yeah. And it's because of the fact that it's in time and it's a changing emotion. It's like telling a story versus describing a scene.
Yeah.
Where you describe a scene, it's like, okay, you have this one emotion, whereas telling a story, there's kind of like, it's a kind of a longer process. But yeah, great way to think about it for sure, with the a picture being kind of just, you get one single emotion. Oh, that being said, it could be a complex picture and you could be looking around. But
100%. There, and I'm sure there's definitely great, amazing art that will evoke plenty of emotion in me, and I just haven't taken the time to go and look at it and stuff. But we're also not in a place where art is like very, very like really that big. Like we're in North America, like both of these countries are pretty young, but if you go over to like Paris and stuff, like my the parents out here just went to Paris recently, and like they're talking about like the art like that's like centuries old and like like carved into castles, and like if you went there and like saw that is still art, like, and definitely. Still I mean like still like not in motion, and not still as in like also. But it's like non-moving art that's frozen in time, and yet like the sheer scale of it is so overwhelming, impressive, that you wouldn't it would definitely be like, wow, this is better than listening to a song. It's going to take me like a year to see it all. Yeah,
I know, definitely. And obviously there's different mediums as well, but I think for me, I don't know if anything will ever supersede music. And obviously I'm so biased because the longer you are in a medium, we're talking about art and painting and whatnot, we have no idea. Like there's so many things that are just they're just beyond like all these little nuances that for us are just subconscious because we don't understand. Whereas like when we're talking about music, when we write a song, we're working on like the most basic level because we have that understanding.
It's the same thing. It's 100% relative like perspective based off of what you've spent your time focusing on, but both of them go equally as deep. Like painting, like if a painter sees a picture, then they're not just going to see it the same way that we see it. They're going to see so many other things.
All the styles and the history of the styles. And I mean, we can't even say because I don't think we know. I don't know.
What really tripped me out crazily is that like one of my best friend's dad was like an insanely good watercolor painter. Yeah. And just like looking at the way that he would paint stuff and like comparing it to the way that we hear things. So it's trippy to me to think like when I'm listening to anything, like any sound that I hear, if I hear music on or if I hear a sound outside, like I'm thinking about like a way that is incorporatable into music. And like I hear things and can pick out things that other people would just like not even realize were there, let alone like think it was worth any value.
Definitely.
But for those people who can paint, who can like look at a thing and then look at a piece of paper and then paint it the same way that I can like hear a melody in my head and then play it, they can think of a thing and see it. You know what I mean? Yeah. So they must see so much differently than everybody else sees, similar to how we hear everything differently than everyone else hears, and that must be weird.
That's crazy because I've never thought of that. Like because I understand from okay, this is how I hear everything differently, but I couldn't imagine that being your visual sense. But
yeah, imagine seeing and being like, this is the depth, this is the exact scale. You see like exactly how big everything is and like where it is from the vision or the point of view you're looking at it.
That's
to the
interesting.
point where you can rescale it down just by like remembering it. Like I can't look at something and draw it. It doesn't look anything like what I was looking at.
No, definitely not.
It doesn't
Unless
matter
it's a
how hard I
stick figure.
try.
And even then, it's not going to be very accurate.
How often are you looking at a stick figure? You know?
Yeah, well, not very often. In elementary school a bit more, but not anymore.
That would actually be so funny to see someone like doing like a painting where they're like painting something and they're like looking over like at the thing and then like it shows what they're looking at and there's just like a stick man.
Yeah.
That they're looking at.
Yeah.
But then they painted a person and they're like, oh fuck.
I really screwed this one up. Looks way too realistic.
That would be like a Rick and Morty thing. Like I would see that in some parallel universe where they're actually stick people.
Yeah. No,
anyway,
for sure.
Moving forward.
Yeah. So
yeah,
that's my background. It's, I would say it's somewhat unconventional, but it is what it is. Now let's take a look down your history and see, because I actually don't know a ton other than you did a lot of band in school, and you're obviously you've got a background in music that is far beyond, like starts much earlier than me, because I just listened to Big Shiny Tunes for like 5 years, so there's my musical education. But so yeah, I think what I wanted to start this was, what drove you, like who drove you kind of in your childhood to get into music? Was it your parents that said, okay, you're going to go to this class and do that? Was it within where you're like, okay, I want to just picked it up yourself, you were interested in it? Or was it like a teacher at school? And this is not just listening, this is actually kind of playing an instrument, because I know you started playing an instrument way, way earlier, like from a serious perspective than me.
You mean, wait, so you want to know the way earlier, or you want to know from a serious perspective?
Well, I mean, when you were, if it was
like they kind of begin in the same place. So I'll just start here.
Okay.
Like way, way, way back, like pretty much as far as I can remember, like my grandma owned a little organ thing, and I have it still. It's like in my house, and it's like an electric powered organ. You plug it in, you turn it on, and then like the thing goes whoosh, and it like fills up with air, and you press the keys, and it's only like 3 octaves or something. It's like really small.
Yeah.
It's got these weird little buttons off to the side that like have chord names on them, and if you press them, it's supposed to play a chord, but they were really broken. It sounded like really, really bad when you press them, so I just never pressed those buttons. But anyway, whenever we were there was literally nothing to do because they lived in like nowhere, like on the side of a little mountain with nothing around at all. And
this was before cell phones.
Oh yeah, wait. Oh my god, I was like 3, like nothing. Yeah, no cell phones, no internet, dude. Like this is like back in the day. There's no internet.
Oh, dude, the internet was definitely around. It just was not being used by.
It was not
many people at that point.
It wasn't a user thing. Yeah. So okay, fair. But anyway, so I would just play this little thing, and like I would just like spend hours just like playing this and like trying to write songs. I didn't know what I was doing. Just put like little pieces back and forth together.
Yeah.
So but I was good enough to at least pick things that sounded good. And so I have to imagine that my parents noticed that I liked it and I was having fun, because I always wanted to do that. Even at my other cousin's place that we would visit, they had like an electric piano there, and I would always sit down and want to play it. All I want to do is play it and stuff.
Okay.
And so anyway, eventually at some point my mom put me into piano lessons, and I don't think I asked for it. I don't know if she asked me if I wanted to and I said yes, or all I remember is being there one day.
Yeah.
And so I'm like playing. And even like back then, I was like already like getting distracted like during the lessons, because like I would be like playing stuff, and then I would like hear that it sounded like some melody I heard. And I actually remember in one of my piano lessons, like this is trippy, because this specific lesson was in like a Parks and Rec building, because it was like a program, like a trade show. I don't know, maybe something sort of thing. Anyway, but like that was, the lady was like getting new students at this building, and then like she actually taught us at her house. So eventually we moved over to her house to learn piano. But even in that building, I remember like my second lesson, I'm like playing, and I remember like a song that was in a video game, and I was like, oh, this sounds like this thing, and I would just like start trying to like play it and stuff. So I definitely was like super like ambitious in my wantings to play music. But anyway, so lessons started, and they were good for the first little while because I was just stoked I got to sit and play on a grand piano.
Yeah.
But
yeah, when you go to the piano teacher's house, it's always you get a nice piano.
But you can't really noodle and have fun, and like the most growth you're going to get as a musician is when you just like have hours to like make as much noise as you want without any constraints or like self like insecurities of what you're playing,
and people aren't listening kind of thing, because that has a different effect.
Oh yeah, 100%, because like nothing sounds worse, to any musician than themselves sucking, and they don't ever want anyone to hear that. But so anyway, I went to piano lessons for a while, but I started to get bored with it because it was a lot of classical stuff that wasn't going like hard enough. Like it wasn't like, I don't know if it wasn't like challenging enough or whatever, because I'm sure like I still had a lot of things to learn, and I just obviously wanted to bypass the basics of learning fingering techniques and stuff and just like go into like trying the hardest thing that there is.
Yeah.
Because, standard ambition. But anyway, I was always good at the theory, and I liked that because I like math, and so theory was just kind of basically math. And so I was like, I always like, I didn't have fun, but I never struggled when I was like doing like the little exercise booklets they would give me.
Yeah.
But eventually I just kind of got bored with the playing, and I stopped taking piano lessons in 4th grade. So I would have been
so how many years would that have been?
I was like, I did it. I took piano lessons for 4 years. I'm pretty sure I was going to them I'm pretty sure I started piano lessons when I was in kindergarten, and I stopped when I was in grade 4. So that was a while. But yeah, I didn't take too much from that other than my knowledge of music theory and like an ear for being able to understand the piano and sort of take it from there. And I still kept playing the piano, but I didn't take lessons for a little while after that.
Yeah.
But that, and then there's the same thing as you. There was a little bit of a gap where I wasn't doing much music stuff, and it was like grade 5, grade 6. And then when grade 7 came, there was a band program, and I was like, I want to join band. Actually, let's go back a little further. In grade 6, in grade 6, there was like a year-end assembly, and in the grade 7s that were a year above us played like Smells Like Teen Spirit on guitar and bass in front of the school. And so up until this point, my only experience playing music was like the piano lessons and stuff.
The recitals.
And my parents showing me music, which was like 5440 and like not anything exciting. I was pretty sheltered as far as the music that I was given to listen to.
Yeah.
In grade pardon me. Grade like 5 or 6, my friends started in grade. No, this is what it is. My grade 5, my friends started getting into rap, so I started getting into like Eminem and stuff, and that was always difficult because I could never listen to it ever anywhere in my house because as soon as my parents heard it, they're like, "It's bad music, like the swearing and this and that," and they're like, "Turn it off, like you're not allowed to listen to that." And I'm like, "Oh my god." And so that sucked, and I had to like sneakily try to find ways to listen to music when I was at my friend's house and stuff, but I was always stoked to hear it.
Yeah.
And then in grade 6, my friends started getting into metal, and so I was like, oh sweet. So I started listening to like Slipknot and Korn and Nine Inch Nails and Mudvayne and like heavy bands.
Your parents' worst fears.
Oh yeah, but at the same time, it wasn't as bad because they were screaming and you couldn't understand the lyrics. So I just told them, I'm like, they're not swearing, like it's just screaming.
It's good, yeah, it's just screaming. That's
right?
Definitely much better. It's funny because I was wondering when the metal came in, because obviously that's a pretty significant influence for you today. Yeah, sorry, go on.
So yeah, that and like Linkin Park as well was a huge one on there. So that's when I started listening to metal, like grade 6, grade 5, grade 6, and then in grade 7 they brought a band program, and still before that, the kids, they played guitar, and I was in grade 6, and I saw it, and I was like, I was in grade 6, and I was like listening to metal, and I saw them play this rock guitar, and I'd never seen someone play a guitar that had distortion on it in front of me ever. And I was like, this is loud, this is powerful, this sounds fucking dope, this is not stupid guitar stuff. Like I did take guitar lessons way before this. I forgot about this. I had a tiny little acoustic guitar that was like a tiny like half-size guitar that like my aunt got me for like a birthday way long ago. Yeah. And so I took some guitar lessons, and I learned Happy Birthday. I learned the melody to Happy Birthday. I'm like, guitar is dumb. This is the stupidest thing ever. Like guitar is not cool. There's nothing fun about it.
Was it nylon strings?
Yeah, no, it was steel strings, but
Steel
like
strings.
it
Okay.
was so small of a guitar that like it was not even in tune. Like it couldn't even be intonated properly at
Oh
all. It
my
was like,
God.
but I mean, it was functioning enough for me to play some stuff, and I was like, okay. So I didn't care about guitar at all, and then yeah, I kind of forgot that I was playing guitar because it was just an acoustic guitar, and I was listening to metal at the time, but I didn't really think about like how it was made or that it was even possible for me. So anyway, I heard the grade sevens playing this stuff, and I was like, whoa, like people can actually do this, like for real, you know what I mean? Like, oh, it's a thing, like
It's actually interesting
it's
and it
actually
relates to.
reachable.
Yeah.
Yeah, like so it's
Well, at
yeah.
this
So
point,
I
you'd heard you would listen to Slipknot and Korn, right?
Mhm.
By this point, but you hadn't actually seen it being played. So for you, it's like you like
Mhm.
this music, but then actually seeing people in front of you in the same room playing probably had an interesting effect.
Well, yeah, and it's funny to think about that because as I was saying it, I'm like, why wouldn't I have seen it? Because I do remember watching a lot of Much Music, but there's another thing. I wasn't allowed to watch Much Music a lot because there was like some shows on Much Music that were like mildly inappropriate, and like I'm a kid and my parents wouldn't let me.
Yeah.
So whenever I did get to watch Much Music, it was generally like pop songs and stuff like that. So it wasn't showing instruments being played. It was just them like singing, and and so I didn't really even think about it. And then obviously later, eventually, I started being allowed to like watch that stuff, and like I'd
Yeah.
stay up later, so I'd see like Much Loud with like heavy bands, and I'm like, oh, cool. So I'd find some other bands, like Trivium was one of them that I found on Much Music. I'm like, oh, that's cool. So anyway, then in grade seven, I've got a guitar. That's the point of this thing that I keep trying to skip. I asked for a guitar and we found one. It was a little Behringer guitar that came with like a tiny little like I don't know, it was like a 2-inch amp,
Like
or
a
something.
pocket
Like,
amp almost kind of thing.
no, it was actual size. It wasn't like a stupid one, but it was like
2
probably
inch.
I think it was an 8-inch. I think it was an 8-inch amp, and like it was
Yeah.
on the 10, it was like barely loud enough to like.
Oh my God.
Well, I thought it was loud at the time, but it definitely is not loud enough to overpower a drum set. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Um,
And so this is after you had listened to these older people who were in your mind cool. You're like, okay, well these cool kids can play guitar, so I need to get a guitar and an amp so I can be cool too.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, so I ended up getting it, but I didn't spend too much time with it because I had no one else to play with, and all of my other friends were like doing other things, so I would always want to hang out with other people, and so I was like trying to keep up with like school. I mean, like this is grade 6, it doesn't even matter, but at that age I'm like I want to have friends. It does matter. It's everything to someone who's that age.
Yeah.
So I sacrificed my time that I could have spent practicing the instrument on like whatever, everything else, just procrastinating and doing stupid stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
But anyway, the learning curve on guitar it's a very steep slope at the beginning. Like you suck for a long time,
Yeah,
and then you start to sound good.
Totally, and I went through the exact same process. Basically, anybody that you're like, oh wow, you can really play guitar, and it's like just spend 8 months having your fingers hurt forever, and then it just gets way easier. Once you get past the fact that like you can deal with 2 separate hands, there's really just about 8 months, I would say, where you just have to grind. Maybe longer than that.
Yeah.
Depends on how often you're practicing. But for me, it was about 8 months, and then things started to click.
Yeah, 100%. And so my attention span was nothing. I'm even going back to the piano teacher story. My attention span's bad.
Yeah.
So I kind of gave it up. I didn't really give it up. It just kind of disappeared. So long story short, grade 7 comes along. I joined the band program, which just started, and I'm like, what am I going to play? Like, I don't know. Obviously, guitar's not allowed because that's, and everyone wanted to because, everyone's a stupid noodler.
Everybody
but
wanted
then
guitar,
you find
yeah.
out, yeah, and then you find out that there's no guitar, and it's like you fucking wonder why. Well, of course not. You can't put like 12 kids playing a guitar at that age like in a room together. You'll never get anything done. All you hear is like like all day long.
Yeah, so much Enter Sandman.
Oh yeah, just a bunch of like hooligans not listening.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, what am I gonna do? What's the next best thing? Trombone. I picked trombone literally because I thought it looked funny and I just wanted to go. And so I go ahead.
It's probably the funniest instrument of all the
it's the
instruments in the band. Yeah.
The tuba maybe is funnier because it just sounds like a fart, but like you can't look cool playing a tuba. I mean, it's hard to look cool playing a trombone, but it's easier than a tuba. And there wasn't a tuba. So anyway, I picked trombone, and then we go to band, and the first day, the girl that was in my class, there was a girl who ended up playing drums. Her brother was like a very skilled drummer, and he was much older, so she had experience with like music already and was like pretty good, right? And so to my surprise, so anyway, we go to this locker room, and we had to like pick up all the pieces of the drum kit because the room we used for band wasn't actually like band room; it was a room. So we'd go there and carry these things. And I remember going in and grabbing the snare drum and picking it up and like trying to walk with it down the hall. And like the whole time I'm walking there, like the other person's carrying the bass drum. Some people have the toms, and I'm like, why do you need a snare drum? Like, isn't that for marching? Like for like literally, I actually asked that question out loud, and I remember the girl looking at me and like kind of smirking and just laughing. And I'm like, thinking back on it now, I'm like, man, she was years ahead of me as far as like maturity and understanding life. But like, who knows now? Well, but it's just funny.
She probably had a musical parent.
I'm not necessarily musical parents, but definitely her brother was very skilled musician already.
Somebody who could introduce you to things, which helps a lot. Yeah, at least.
I didn't have that.
I don't think it's wrong, but it can speed up your process and get you further along earlier.
Oh yeah. Well, 100%. I think a lot of people who have older siblings tend to excel because they do get that help from a place that is not so parental and so demanding that makes you want to rebel. But when you hear something from an older sibling, you're like, oh yeah, okay.
Well, they're cool. They're cool listen. Where your parents are annoying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even though they're saying the same things in different ways.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyway, we set up the drum set, and then we started to play the first song, and she played a rock beat, and I literally heard her go like just play it, and I was instantly like, holy fuck, what is that? What are you doing? Like instantly I'm like, that's how they do it. That's how the thing happens in the songs that I listen to. I never even thought about it. I'm like, how did I not realize that this is how they make the sound that is the drums? I've never thought about the drums. Yeah. And I'm like, I understand rhythm. Rhythm's so easy. It was the only thing that slowed me down playing other instruments, obviously, was the notes. Because when you play the wrong notes, it sounds bad. But if you it's easier to just do the rhythm. So I'm like, fuck, I can play drums. I'm like, 100% I can play drums. I know that I can do that right away. There's no doubt in my mind. I'm like, I can play drums. And I went home. I'm like, Mom, buy me a drum set. I want a drum set. Drums. And like literally running around the house. I'm like, drums. And so like, anyway, it got to the point where like I asked for it so many times, and like, this is, keep in mind, the start of the year. So it's like September, all right? So 4 months to us now is like zero. Like goes by in like 2 seconds, right? Like I literally don't even remember the last 3 months of my life. They just like happened, right?
Yeah.
Like, so anyway, but back then it was like September. Okay, so now imagine this. I'm like, I got a paper route and everything. Like I took it over from my friend. I was going to say his name, but you probably don't know him. Anyway, so long story short, I had a paper route, and I'm getting like $20 a month. And like, I'm like, okay, I want a drum set. And I'm like looking, the only places that I have access to like look for anything, because we didn't really like have a good, like Google wasn't even like really that functional back then. For websites, like, so I'm like, yeah. So I'm like looking anywhere that I can to like get an idea of prices for drum sets. And like my mom took me to like a music store, like, and I went to I guess I had been to music stores in the past, like looking for the guitar, but like never really looking at drums. So like started looking at prices of drum sets. I'm going everywhere, and I'm like, holy fuck, these are so expensive. Like $800, like $900. Like to a kid, I'm like, oh my god, I'll never have that amount of money. Like, are you kidding me right now? So I'm like looking anywhere, and like eventually my mom gave me the Sears like wish book flyer thing for Christmas, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I found like a drum set. There was like 2 drum sets from Sears, like CB drum sets, and one was like $4.99, and one was like $5.99. Like $4.99, like it's totally doable. I can do it. I'm like doing the calculations, like get my
figuring out calculator.
I'm like $20 a month. So to get $500, I will be able to buy this drum set by the time I'm in grade 10. That was my view of the world. I'm like, this is how long I can get it. I'm like, I swear. And I was like, I really hope they get it for Christmas because I don't know if I can wait that long. And like, that was my argument. I'm like, guys, like, it's going to take me till grade 10 to just get this thing. Like, please. So anyway, every day I got home from school, and like I would like look in my room just to see if they like surprised me and like put a drum set in there, like as if like I'm gonna show up home to like a set up drum set in my room, like sparkling and shiny with a fucking halo over top of it, like like literally. But that's what my imagination was telling me. So anyway, I just like wished for it every day, and then Christmas showed up, and I'm like, This is it. It's got to be a day.
It's got to
be.
I'm
going to walk out, and it's going to be there right in front of the tree, like set up perfectly with like a fucking light on it. That's like, like it's just like imagining, like here it is. And I come out, and like not anything. It's not there.
There's no big presents.
And there's no big presents either. And I'm like, fuck. And like I'm so sad, and like, but I can't be sad. So I'm like, oh, like all right, I guess I'm still waiting.
I guess I gotta open these presents that don't matter.
Yeah. So my parents totally pranked me like crazy, and so the first present I opened, it's like ends up being a scavenger hunt, and so there's like a clue, and it's like, go check this. So what they had done is they had taken all the parts of the drum set and hidden them around the house. So I had to go and look all around the house for this drum set, and so it ended up taking a while.
Yeah.
Which was cool. Because like that was basically like the most of my presents was this drum set that I needed.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I got it and set it up, and sure enough, I was right. I literally sat down and I just started playing a basic rock beat, and it was
Worked
not
right
a
away.
problem.
Wow.
It was not a problem. I just did it, and then I started adding to it. Like I would just like flail my arms, and like the next beat that I figured out was the amen beat. That was, so it went from that. The first one was like doots cuts, like just standard like kick snare, and then I figured out the kick snare, kick snare, and then kick snare, kick snare, and I started like doing that. And then when the first time I figured out a cool beat was when I did the amen thing. I was like doon doon cut doon cut doon cut doon cut, because like that's so easy. You literally just like do the basic rock beats, and then you just like flail your hands back and forth for 2 seconds, and then you go back to it, and it's fine, and it ends up being that beat, right?
Yeah.
So I just started like having fun with it, and I loved it, and I was able to do it right away, and I'm like, great, this is something that I don't have to put too much effort into, and I can be cool, because I really wanted the satisfaction without having to put in the time. Classic kid move.
Well, guitar, like your fingers are hurting for ever, whereas guitar, you just hit the drum. It sounds right. There's no like weird ringing of you're not holding the string well enough, or you're picking the wrong thing. You don't have to learn picking. You just hit it. I can see why you were interested in it.
Yeah, and I think impatience got the better of me with all the other instruments. It made me stop taking piano lessons, and it made me not take up guitar as well. And like even thinking back to like I used to do a lot of magic as well. Like I was super into magic, because there used to be this booth set up in the mall in Nanaimo that was like they sold magic tricks. Yeah. So they would always get you, because it's so easy to show you a magic trick. Are you kidding? You walk by and like, want to see a magic trick, and every kid is like, yeah, I want to see a magic trick. They do something dope, and then all of a sudden they're like, for $17 we can teach it to you.
That's a good business model.
You're like, oh, like as a kid you're like, oh my god, right? And like the parents are like, fuck, right? So anyway,
parents probably avoiding that booth.
Oh yeah, so like, but every time I'd go by, I'm like, oh, I want that, and I would like really want to like save up all my money for my paper route, right? So like every time I got a check for my paper route, I was able to buy like another magic trick. It was like $20 each, right? Yeah. So I was always astonished by these things that were like absolutely too good to be true, and it turned out they always were, because you would buy it and it was like, here's a trick deck, here's a trick thing, here's a thing that like if anybody handles for 2 seconds, they're gonna know how the trick is done, and you can't let them do it, but it's really easy for you to do. Yeah. So it's the same thing. I didn't want to put the time into getting really good at handling cards properly. I would rather just be able to do something insane right now. Yeah. So you pay the money, and then you have no skills and the thing that does the job for you. So it's funny how impatience can really be detrimental to your ability to become a master of something if you really wanted to do that.
Yeah, it can kind of make it hard to focus on things. But I'm kind of wrapping back to the drum kit. I'm guessing your house got a lot louder after that Christmas. Did they just leave it in your room, or was there a special spot for it in the garage? Or
okay, so here's how it works, right? The garage was not big enough for the car. It was the car. It was only big enough for the car. Sorry, there was nothing else in there. So at first it was in my bedroom, right? So it's like it just fit. I had a small bed at the time. I mean, it was just like a double bed, like not even a double, like a twin. You know what I mean? Like a small bed for a kid. And so I was able to set it up in the corner of my room, and it's a small ass room, right? So literally my bass drum was like touching the corner of my bed. Like you had to step over the drums and the bed in order to get to the window. And then you had to like step over the tom to get to the behind the drum set, So it's already like shit. And so obviously the first thing you do is, as soon as you get a drummer, like there's no other instrument that is more customizable than a drum set. You start looking it up, and it's like, if you're the kind of person who likes to add on things, well, you're doomed. If you get a drum set, you're literally going to be adding on to it for the rest of your life. So I'm like, buy another cymbal, buy like another cymbal and a clamp, and then like another cymbal and then another clamp or another stand, and then every time I would buy something, I always was like, no, this will actually give me more space because I'll be able to reconfigure it in a more ergonomical fashion by adding this thing. Like I literally convinced my parents to let me get a second bass drum because I told them that having 2 bass drums would allow me to put the drums on top of the bass drums instead of off to the side, which would take up less space. And it's like, no, you're not taking up less space in a room if you add something with a giant like that and a 20-inch drum to the mix.
The biggest drum that there is. Like I need 2 of the biggest drums.
Yeah, it's stupid. So it eventually got to the point where it didn't fit in my room anymore. And so we cleared out the guest room, which was the same size, but it was a bedroom that was right next to my room, and turned it into the band room. And then it just it's like taking a flower out of a tiny pot and putting it into a big pot.
You got more space,
It explodes, right? It's going to grow.
Yeah.
So the drum set grew and grew and grew and grew to the point where I had 2 kick drums. I had an 8-inch tom, a 10-inch tom. Both of those were like only 2 inches deep, so they were like the bottoms were cut off. It was actually from another tiny drum set that I ended up buying. But so it was like 8-inch tom, 10-inch tom, then a 10-inch normal rack tom, a 12-inch rack tom, 13-inch rack tom, a 14-inch floor tom, a 15-inch floor tom, a 16-inch floor tom, and then on the and this is actually really good. This actually brings me back to I'm gonna stop here before I continue just explaining this.
Yeah.
At this point, I was in high school when I had all this stuff, and we were playing jazz. Like I followed the jazz program into high school after going out of elementary school, and we would get little gigs at the mall, right? And so at this point, I've met new people who are like good musicians. So Avery is actually the person I'm going to bring up into this.
Yeah.
But I found a guitar player, Jacob, who was a part of my first band in high school. That was like a band that actually made more than one half of the song.
Yeah.
So him, and then Avery Littlemore was our bass player, and so we got a gig at the mall, and
nice.
We were just supposed to be playing jazz for half an hour, right? It's just a tiny little set, and this is something that our band teacher used to do, is get us this tiny little gigs for experience, just like playing something. It's
something to lead up to as well. Like, you want to, if you're running, you want to have a marathon or a race that you can actually train for.
Yeah, it's experience, and that's the great thing about our high school, is that like the band program wasn't just like stupid music that nobody cared about, that they only play at like a little festival. Like the teachers there were like, we want to train you for being able to play a gig. Like if you were a student who cared about music, they knew, and they would give you gigs outside of school.
Yeah.
So long story short, well, actually, to make a short story long, rather, Avery had just joined our band, and I really wanted him to see this drum set because I'd been putting this masterful thing together for a long time, and I'm like I gotta show it to him, right? So I'm like, I'm gonna bring the whole thing to this mall gig. And so I'm like, I got it all ready. I'm like, I literally I put tape on all of the individual parts because there was like there's so many things, like so many parts. So I took a whole drum set down, and I
brought
put
2 kick drums to a mall gig.
No, not two kick drums. I didn't have 2 at this point. But anyway, so here's what happens. His mom shows up at my house with her van, right? And I've got all of my drum set like in the front foyer of my house, like ready to go. And this trail is like long. It's like goes like covers the foyer and then like goes down like around the corner and then down the hall a bit, and there's just drums. So I'm like handing stuff to her. I'm like, okay, here, take this. And like, I'm just being like super pretentious about it too. I'm like, don't drop anything because it's all super worth a lot of money. Like, here's my cymbal case. It weighs like 50 pounds because there's like 12 cymbals in here, and like, yeah, the amount of money that's in this case is like a lot. So like, blah, blah, blah. And, like,
don't drop it.
Yeah, so I'm like handing her stuff, and she's like, oh wow, this is a lot of stuff. Like, are you sure you need this? Like, definitely knows that I don't, but like doesn't have the heart to tell me to not, because we're already like too deep at this point.
Yeah.
So anyway, we get to the fucking venue a half an hour early because that's how long it takes to set up. And I'm like, I'm sure I can set this thing up in a half an hour. I know I can. Like, it's fine. So anyway, we like show up at the mall, and Liz opens the car door, and like everybody's standing there, and their jaws are just like, boom, like straight on the floor. Like, what is happening? Because like this whole van, a minivan, is full of drums, and like we've played gigs before. They've seen a drum set like from in school. They know how big a drum set's supposed to be.
Couldn't you do like just a single cymbal, a snare, and a kick? Like, you wouldn't need more than that for a jazz setup, right?
Yeah, I mean, a hi-hat, a ride, a snare drum, and a kick drum, or even less in some situations. But
God.
like, Yeah, but like that's pretty much all you need really to play a jazz gig.
Yeah.
Maybe one tom if you're really eccentric. But so anyway, we show up and I'm like, we grabbed like dollies, like the flatbeds from the mall, and we like everybody's rolling. We got two of them, and I'm like, I load up one, and they take it. And I load up another one, they take it, and we run back, and then they start dropping stuff off, and then they come back, and I load up another dolly, and then I'm like, okay, like you guys can grab the rest of the stuff. I'm gonna go and start setting it up, and I'm like going as fast as I can. So here we go. I'm like, okay, kick drum, like set it up. All right, okay, rack tom, and I think I had three. Yeah, that's right. So I had the snare drum and then a 10-inch, a 12-inch, and a 13-inch rack tom. So 3 toms, right? And then 2 floor toms, like 2 huge-ass floor toms. And then double kick pedal on my kick drum, obviously necessary. And then here's my cymbal setup. This is the best part. So I've got hi-hat on my left, and I'm gonna go from the left side to the right side. So it's hi-hat, and then a splash cymbal, an 8-inch splash cymbal that's just above the hi-hat, right? And then next to the 8-inch splash cymbal is a 12-inch splash cymbal, okay? And then above those two is a 16-inch crash cymbal. And then right directly in front of me, over top of the kick drum, all over top of the 12 and 13-inch toms, I've got a China cymbal, okay? And it's an 18-inch China cymbal upside down because it looks much cooler. And then there's a cymbal stack arm that screws into the top of that where you usually put the nut for the cymbal on. Screws on the top of that. So then above that is a Zildjian ZXT trash former cymbal, which is like this orange, like warped, weird shaped cymbal where when you hit it, it just literally sounds like glass breaking. It is absolutely the last cymbal you ever want to bring to a jazz gig. But anyway, so it was or a mall. Yeah. Oh yeah. The reverb in there. I mean, just does not flatter it at all. So I've got this transformer, and then over to my right, and we're starting to move to the right. I've got a 20-inch ride cymbal. Above that, I've got an 18-inch crash ride cymbal because you never know when you're going to need to crash and then ride as opposed to just ride. So and then next to the ride cymbal going farther to my right, there is a secondary permanently closed hi-hat just in case I need to use my double kick pedal. Then I can still use a closed hi-hat. So a second hi-hat, and then above that one was another China cymbal, a 14-inch China cymbal. So how many is
this total? How many is this total in terms of cymbals and rides?
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cymbals. Yes, that sounds right. 10 different cymbals.
Oh my god.
Yeah, but I mean 12. 12 if you include both sides of each hi-hat.
And you were able to set it all up in 30 minutes?
Barely. So I was going as fast as I could, and I just got this up. And to top it all off, there was a Slipknot sticker on the front of my bass drum that everybody could see. So It took me like a half an hour to set this up. We started playing the gig, and it was absolutely like just, I don't even know what to call it, like a clown show. Like people are walking by, like stopping dead in their tracks, like jaws on the floor, like what? Like they're seeing this huge drum set, and then it's like 5 little kids playing like bad jazz music, like Christmas jazz music in a mall.
And there's a Slipknot sticker.
Slipknot, yeah, second hi-hat, everything, man, double kick, and I was trying to make use of it. So I'm really trying to impress Avery at this point. I'm like, you got to join our band because I got a huge drum set, so I'm cool because I got a huge drum set, I got a huge dick, it's great. So basically just like trying to convince him to join this band, and it was absolute insanity. It took me longer to set up and tear it down than it did to play the whole show.
Oh my god.
And that was the day I knew for sure I wanted to be a musician.
That's crazy. Well, obviously, the moral of the story here, I've asked you a single question, and drums is definitely the instrument for you that I'm guessing has been the most important for you. I kind of knew that already, kind of getting into this. I didn't know all the extra history, but I had a feeling that drums would be probably the thing. So yeah, that confirms that for me for sure.
That's 100% what made it possible. Just to wrap that up, to make it just to state a point on that, is that when I played guitar, it was really hard to find someone to play with because everybody played guitar and it never sounded like music. But when I played drums, it was very easy to find a guitar player, and so I was able to start playing music with another person, and the stuff that we were playing actually sounded like music because it had rhythm and it had a harmony on top of it. So that's when I started feeling the musical freedom that gave me the answer that was like, yes, you can experience the enjoyment of playing music with someone. That's what drums gave me.
That's cool. That's a really good establishing thing. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is kind of, so this is talking about playing, and obviously you were in a band, so I'm sure you did a little bit of recording, but what was your first, per se, like when you were thinking about like, okay, I want to record a song or a project?
Okay, this is perfect. I'm so glad that these songs or these ideas segued into each other, because I have them written on our page here.
Yeah.
The things to probably mention. So the first one is mall jazz, which is that.
Yeah.
And the next one is the multi-track. So this is hilarious. So yeah, I started playing in a band, and we needed a way to record ourselves. So the first thing that I ever used to record anything with was actually a little, I believe it was Sony MP3 player, and it had a record button on it.
Would you just have like a single mic?
So okay, no, it gets better. It gets better. It gets so much better.
I know the exact MP3 player you're talking about. I had one of them as a kid. Oh my God,
wait, what did it look like?
It was a little square with a shiny side, and you had a single AAA battery you slide into it.
Dude, I think that might have been it. It was like white and round, and it had a little blue screen on it.
No,
and it was
dude.
Really so.
Okay.
Oh, maybe it's different.
I'll look it up, because actually I think I had that one as well. Okay, I'm gonna look this up afterwards.
Yeah, I gotta find it. So anyway, this thing was like bad. So the microphone on it was like you know the pinhole that you use to open your SIM card tray?
Yeah, it's like a phone mic.
It was smaller than that. The hole was so tiny. Oh my God, I couldn't believe you'd have to use a needle to get into there.
Okay. So
that was the microphone. So we literally we had written like a couple songs, and so we go into the band room, and he's playing on my Behringer amp, on my 10-inch little or 8-inch tiny little amp, as loud as it can go. There's nothing good in there, and it barely overpowers. So what we do is we would put the MP3 player in the room somewhere, and then like play it, and then if that didn't sound good, we would put it somewhere else in the room and just try different spots to see where it sounded the best. And we're doing definitely the worst thing we could do. I mean, first of all, that microphone cannot handle any of the volume.
I wish you had those recordings. They would be so funny to listen to from a technical standpoint.
I wonder if I could find them. I actually think the computer that I used to make them still exists, and my mom's been trying to get me to destroy it for a long time, but I keep forgetting to, because it's like the lowest of my priorities. It's literally like it's an old Dell computer with a 40 gigabyte hard drive.
Oh,
it's bad. So the sadness in your voice.
Well, I know it's probably an IDE hard drive. It's probably one of those really old ones. Anyways,
no idea.
So you're recording with that MP3 player.
Yeah, we recorded it, and eventually I got the brilliant idea to say, oh, dude, there's no way that it's ever going to sound this good recording with this MP3 player, because the way that they do it for real is by multi-tracking. Yeah. So what we need to do is we need to use the MP3 player to record you play the song in full, and then we will record myself playing it with the MP3 player in full. And then I figured out that on Windows, you can use Windows Sound Recorder, and if you open two files at the same time, it will play them together at the same time.
And then did you record that with the MP3 player a second time? Please tell me you did.
Well, actually, it's really funny that you mentioned that, because that is a similar technique that someone I'm working with actually told me they used to record their bands back in the day, but theirs was smart because they used a boom box that had actually an OK tape recording mic, like it recorded onto tape.
Yeah.
And so they would record it onto tape and then put it into the second deck, and then put a new deck into deck A, new tape into deck A, and then play the first recording out while recording the second one, and then play along with that recording. So every time that they would add another take, the one previous was essentially being resampled. So the first take always was the worst quality, but at least they were playing along with the first take. Yeah. This is where I fucked up.
You can't be in time. You probably weren't in time at all.
We didn't use a metronome. We didn't use a count-in. We didn't do anything. I literally pressed the button. I said, okay, it's recording, go. And so then he would play the song as best as he could, and neither of us were skilled enough to actually play a song correctly the same way exactly twice. Are you kidding me? So he played the song, did his best effort, and then I played the song and did my best effort. And I'm like, now I'm when I played the song, I'm just counting in my head what the parts are. I definitely am not remembering it properly. Are you kidding me? So anyway, we go to my computer, and I download these 2 files, and I like open up Windows Sound Recorder, and I open up the other file, and I'm like, okay, let's see how it goes. And then I'm like, okay. He starts playing. I'm like, okay, please, I really, really hope the drums come in time. And somehow they started correctly. We actually waited the right amount of time, but he started playing the intro riff, and then I hit the first kick drum right away, and immediately they went out of sync. So we're listening, and I'm like, oh, what the fuck? Like, why doesn't this sound good? And like, it's 2 already distorted recordings being played like together, like stacking the amplitude of them, so it's even more distorted. There's no options. You can't mix anything. It's just playing them simultaneously. There's literally zero functionality. And I actually thought in my head that doing this would achieve some similar result to what I hear
in songs
from pros. Oh my God. But I was smart because I thought to multi-track it.
Yeah.
So that was my very first experience with recording and trying to produce music, was that. And you know where I legit, like, I actually got the idea to use Sound Recorder was from a video meme way back in the day of a guy who made a song using just Windows Explorer sounds.
Yeah.
And he opens that program up like 6 times, and he plays each of them separately, like as if they're a sample launcher. And he like pitches them, pitches some of the sounds up and down, and it really it inspired me, and I was like, oh, you can do this. Oh, that's how
you can make a whole song out of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that was that.
So you basically made free jazz.
Yeah.
2 different times. Yeah. So that obviously wasn't super serious though. Like you were at the time, you're probably trying to make something interesting, but you didn't even really have the means to do it.
I found the video.
Did you get a computer and kind of like a DAW? When did that happen? And like, you actually realized it? Because I feel like when that happened, you're probably like, okay, I actually can do this. And I'm guessing that you probably had a project in mind. Like what was that? Like if you made a project and you're like, okay, I have this set of sounds, was just recording your band, or what was your first, I would say serious, like actually be able to record it, not just...
Okay, so we got to go back in time again a little bit.
Yeah.
So because a lot of these things were happening simultaneously.
Okay.
But I forgot to mention that I used to write music on Guitar Pro, and that started I think in grade 7, maybe grade 6, when I was doing guitar stuff. I can't remember, but a friend of mine had the program, and I was like, well, that's so cool. So my mom bought it for me. She found it at London Drugs or Shoppers Drug Mart. I think it was London Drugs.
It's definitely London Drugs. They used to have good software. Yeah. I bought a lot of my games from there back in the day.
Yeah, it's actually funny because a lot of people were like, I can't find it. I'm like, London Drugs apparently. So I was writing music with Guitar Pro for a long time because it was the only thing that could ever play music back to me, and it was like the only way that I, as a drummer, could write out musical ideas and know what it sounds like without having to learn how to play it. Again, looking for instant satisfaction instead of just playing the instrument. But at the same time, it was a handy tool to be able to like try and write things, and I didn't know anything about how guitar worked or like really. So the things I was writing on Guitar Pro were like just pretty much fucking impossible to play.
So is that anything like a DAW, or is it more just a VST? Like what's the functionality there?
It's nowadays it's like a DAW. If you actually look at the new Guitar Pro, it definitely functions like a DAW. But the Guitar Pro 5, the one I was using, you open it up and it's a staff paper, and you write the notes, and you literally, it sucks because you can't just like on Ableton with the grid, how you can just drop something on any beat you want.
Yeah.
No, like everything that you put on comes next in line. You go one, like it's step by step. So if you want the next beat to be a quarter note away, well then you have to write a quarter note on the beat you're on. You can't just write anything and then have the next one be the right rhythm. Like you have to use the proper notation in order to play it back properly.
And it was just like a single channel, just played out a guitar. You basically wrote a guitar line and then it played it.
I think you could have a couple channels. I can't remember how many were allowed, but there was definitely multiple channels because you could use bass, guitar, and drums. It had MIDI drums, MIDI bass, and MIDI guitar. The MIDI bass sounded great. The MIDI bass actually sounds like the standard slap bass that you hear from a MIDI slap bass, like, on an Ableton preset. Like it sounded good. Like there was nothing wrong with it. But the guitar obviously sounded like garbage.
Yeah.
But the drums, MIDI drums, were totally fine. The drums that they came with. But here's the weird thing about how it worked is that I had been doing that for a long time, and I never stopped. I always loved writing on Guitar Pro because, again, that was just my musical expression. But I never thought it would be something useful until my guitar player came back and was like, dude, my guitar teacher started teaching me how to record guitar. And he got a Line 6 UX2, which is the same interface that I have right now.
Yeah.
And so he got that, and then also Cakewalk Sonar, which is to a lot of people, they'll swear by it and say it's a great program. It's actually another one that does compete with Pro Tools sometimes. Some pros, like professionals, use Sonar.
I have heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how well it's holding up nowadays. I haven't thought about it for a long time because I hate that program. But he showed me it, and basically it was all we had to do in order to make things sound good was he recorded his guitar, and since it's a distorted guitar, so it's already like compressed as fuck. Like it's nothing. You don't have to do much to the sound of a distorted guitar to make it sound the same way that it is, and you're lining directly in, so you don't have to mic anything. But then he's like, dude, you can literally bounce the MIDI file from Guitar Pro and open it in Cakewalk, and it understands the MIDI data, and it would actually automatically load up the correct synth, which was really weird.
That's cool.
I didn't understand how it was loading the VSTs, but all I know is you had to select external soft synth as your channel type, and then if you just drag the MIDI onto the channel as if you were going to put a MIDI clip into Ableton, it would import MIDI data. Actually, it does that in Ableton. If you drag it from a clip, it'll load up your instrument, right? So it must store it in there somehow, but it was transferable between Cakewalk and Guitar Pro, which is really weird to me.
Yeah.
So anyway, it would load up the bass mysteriously, magically, and then it would load up the drums. And I never had to do anything to those, and I didn't really know how to add effects or what any of the effects did. My guitar player was just like, oh yeah, you can use a compressor on something. So like showed me, like he'd open it up and like he's like, put a compressor on this, it sounds good, but never explained anything.
Turn some knobs, yeah.
He didn't know either, but like we just, he's like, oh cool. So yeah, and I think we did some basic EQing or something. He might have known about the like cutting bass frequencies. I don't even know back in the day. But so that's all we did. So in order for us to create a song that sounded like something actually listenable, was all we needed to do was record the guitar part, because everything else sounded fine.
Yeah.
And the drums sounded fine enough, right? So like we did that for a while, and so basically, and actually, like funny enough, if you go on YouTube, there are recordings that were done that way, and that I can still show you, and they sound fine actually. I was surprised how good I got it for back then. But at the same time, there were other people who were my age at that time, and they were making like shit that actually sounded like really good. So like my standards were definitely just not high enough.
So what age would this have been?
That was in grade 10.
Okay.
10. I think 9, 10,
9,
like
10, okay.
late 9, probably the summer of grade 9 going into grade 10, around that area.
And you only had Guitar Pro, he had Sonar, so you could only work on it when you were at his place, or what was the deal there?
No, he gave me the CD and I just installed it with all of his serial and all that stuff. So I was using the program, but I didn't own the interface.
Oh, okay.
So but
record
he
guitar,
would let me
but you could do
borrow
everything
sometimes.
else.
What's that?
You couldn't record guitar, but you could do everything else.
Yeah, exactly. But eventually I ended up buying one. I bought the UX2, and that's why I still have it, and that's how I started doing everything, is through Sonar. And eventually I started figuring out how to like do some more things. Like I started, doing my research a little bit, and like I would record drums. Like I actually remember trying to record my drums, and like it was bad. There's actually a couple of music videos that I made of me playing with that drum set, but it's a really tiny little drum kit with like a 14-inch bass drum and like a super tiny piccolo snare. It's like basically something that'd be perfect for drum and bass. But yeah, I recorded it by using the 2 inputs on my UX2 and my Yamaha mixing board. And so I had 8 mic inputs, and I would mix them by sending all of the channels to the left side except for the kick channel I sent to the right side. And I would mix the levels of the snare, the cymbals, and everything on the board analog
as the left channel, yeah, and then
exactly, and send them both mono signals into input 1 and 2 on my interface, which gave me 2 channels, one with the top drums and one with the kick drum.
Smart.
And that was it was as close as I could get to making my drums sound like somewhat listen-toable.
You're already figuring out routing in like grade 10.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's another thing about mixing boards specifically, is I was always fascinated by mixing boards. I never understood them. I could see them and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, so many knobs. How does anyone know what this is?
Yeah.
And in grade, maybe it was 9, 8, 9. No, I think it was 9. I got a very, very, very short-lived job at Music Max. They hired me on for the summer, and I didn't realize I was going to get laid off immediately. I was also a very terrible employee, so like
Yeah.
whatever. But I'm like, yeah, job at a music store, like everyone's dream, you know. And no, but like it's like actually sorry, and I hope I don't offend anyone by saying this, but working at a music store is like where musicians' dreams go to die. That is like you accepting that you didn't make it as a musician,
That's
and now
sad.
you're working at a music store. And like I don't actually want to say that. Like I take that back. I do not mean that seriously, because I know plenty of very skilled musicians who work in music stores, and they just are good at selling music, and they love providing that stuff. So like 100% no offense to those people, but when I was there, the feeling that I got was like I am spending less time playing music and more time learning about how to sell an instrument to other people who come into the store and don't know what they're doing.
It's probably your age too, like the time you were doing it as well. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's the funny thing is like thinking about it when I was in a music store, whenever I wanted to go to a music store, I wanted to like sit down and play something to like show everyone how good I was. And it's like the people who are good at music go into the music store, buy the thing, and leave, because they already like are, you know, secure and they know what they're doing, and they're going to go home and play music or do whatever the fuck they're going to do.
Yeah.
Whereas like people who come into music stores and want to play, they are definitely trying to show off without having the skills. Like it's very rare that you hear someone go into a music store and just like be really good and like rip and like kill it, you know, and sometimes it happens.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's less and less common for me to walk in there and hear something good. It's like from working there, when I was working there, it was very uncommon to hear someone come in and play something good, as it was common to hear someone come in there and play the same riff all day long on 100 different guitars and not even very good.
Yeah.
So I hated it.
Yeah.
So
you didn't like it, but it didn't last too long.
Yeah, but what I did learn there, there was is mixing boards. Because I asked one of the guys who knew, I'm like, can you tell me how the hell this thing works? Like, please explain to me what in the world this thing does. And he's like, okay, well, it's like this. Like, you look at it vertically, and the channel strip goes from the top to the bottom. And I'm like, oh. And as soon as he said that, I was like,
It makes
I
perfect
understand. It makes perfect sense. And he's like, and then these knobs can send the signal to a different thing. And I'm like, oh, so you can have two things. That's how they do the thing with the thing, where you can hear a different thing on the, you know. And so he's explaining how sends work and
it probably related to Cakewalk as well, because I'm sure Sonar was, you know, it's a DAWs of that time were kind of based off mixing boards. I mean, a lot of them still are.
Yeah, and I think that it did have a mixing board view, but I also think it had the same type of volume adjustment that Ableton has, where it was right on the channel, and I definitely preferred using that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I definitely didn't attribute it as much to actual production as much as I did just to like understanding the flow of a signal path there. I didn't put it together. In fact, that was one of the biggest problems that I had with understanding how audio worked in Sonar, is that I didn't really realize that the effect chain had a send order. I didn't really think about it, that like it comes out of one effect and goes into another. Like I guess I assumed they were all running in parallel, because they're just in like slots on the side that go like vertically, just like how Logic works, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't know what was the top or what was the bottom, and I didn't really think too much about it. But that's what changed everything when I started using Ableton, is understanding that the signal goes and follows a very linear path. It goes from left to right, the same way that the sound does, or the same way that the play bar does, right? Yeah,
it's really interesting that you kind of come to that realization just by, you know, using this different software on it. But it's such a fundamental thing that, you know, not a lot of people, there's not like a tutorial per se on how to think about it, but a lot of questions I've heard from people that I'm not a teacher, but I'll be working with somebody. It's like, well, how do you know that this effect should go here? Or like in Ableton, you know, you're grouping, you're choosing a parallel or a sequential signal chain, and like the longer you do it, obviously it just makes sense. You're like, oh, we just want this effect to be after that one. But at first, it's like it doesn't make any sense, and it's definitely a skill that is, I feel like you probably started learning pretty early on. Like when just being in the DAW, messing around with mixers and whatnot. But yeah, it's I feel like not a lot of people really focus on that stuff too much, because it's a really basic thing, right?
It's not a basic thing as in it should be expected to, like, you should be expected to just know it. It's not a hard thing to understand, but it's definitely something that's easy to overlook.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, getting back to your story, then we've kind of talked about kind of, you know, the first instruments, your instruments, and then kind of starting to record them. What I would then want to kind of loop in on is, because we're getting pretty long here. We're just at over about an hour and 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Because like we talked about projects and we kind of talked about recording, but I'd like to talk about like maybe an artist or a band that was like, do you have a name or a band that was like kind of one of the first projects you did, and what was kind of the goal there, the goal of that project?
Like what was the goal of the first project that I did starting as a band? Is that what you're asking?
Well, like something when you start thinking like really seriously musically, like obviously not before Kotek. Before that was, that's obviously a project and it's an idea in itself. What were some before then, kind of, maybe a bit after grade 10, grade 11, when you started getting more serious in that kind of stuff? When you had Ableton?
So essentially, I really wanted to make it in this band. I started in high school, but then it sort of fizzled out. I was putting all my time and effort into it, and then eventually they just kind of stopped caring about it, which I don't blame them. It wasn't really going anywhere. But I continued on doing like my own sort of thing, and that's when I got a guitar. I got a bass first because I thought bass was really cool, and I wanted to learn how to play bass again I wanted to learn how to play bass for the first time because like I saw people playing it and like slapping and doing cool stuff, and I'm like, I want to do that. So I got a bass, and then eventually I got a guitar, and actually for the first little while I was doing all of the songs on just my bass. I would throw distortion on the bass and just play it on the higher two strings, and it sounded like a guitar, so I was able to get away with it. So I just started making my own like solo metal, like progressive, like super ridiculous songs. Like I was trying to emulate Dream Theater because that's who I was super into back then. So I was writing like 10-minute long like songs that were like super epic and like crazy. Now I guess I definitely have all these things around. And I changed my project to Mike M the Music Man. How creative.
Yeah.
So anyway, I made a couple songs like under that alias, and then since I didn't have anyone to play with like metal wise anymore, I don't even know what I was doing. Like I knew I wanted to do music and I was super serious about it. There was never a time where I was like, I don't want to do this. Like I made a choice. In fact, I made the choice to be a musician in grade 10 because I remembered that was the first time I had the option of whether or not to choose to continue taking French. And I knew that I had to have my grade 10 French in order to do a bunch of different things in college. And I remember being really frustrated that I had to make this decision that early in my life. I'm like, I'm in grade 10 right now and I'm making a decision that could fuck me over later. But I'm like, I guess now or never. And I'm like, I don't want to do French, so I guess I'm not going to be an engineer. I'll be a musician.
Yeah. That's funny.
Whoops. So anyway, I was trying to figure it out, but my luck was kind of like dwindling at that point because I didn't have any band members and I wanted to be in a band, but I did have my best friend who was super into jazz. And so I was playing with him, and I was still doing jazz in high school and stuff. And I got to the point where I was good enough to like hold my own, and like in any small gig, like I could show up and play, and it would be like okay, like I wouldn't do anything too drastically bad.
Yeah, you play with other people.
Yeah, 100%. I could sit down, they could call a song, and I could play it, and I could start and stop at the same time. I might not like do all the perfect things in the middle, but like it'll sound somewhat professional enough that people don't hate themselves when they're listening to it. So I continued playing jazz with him, and like made a couple bands and like went around town, like getting small gigs and like doing things. But either way, I kept musical, but my heart was never in it as like the music that I really wanted to do. I always wanted to make some sort of like heavy, like invigorating, powerful music because like I guess I think that if I think back to I think I was like I guess bullied as a kid, and so that made me want to feel powerful, maybe, I guess, I don't know, and like the sound of like heavy music made me feel big and powerful, and so like I wanted to create that feeling and give that to other people as well.
Yeah.
So I was always into this like super big, invigorating, like powerful, like exciting, complicated music, and I especially complicated stuff because I wanted to demonstrate how skilled I was because I wanted people to think I was skilled.
Yeah.
So it goes into like that just kind of followed me, and I kept making like some sort of like prog rockish style type stuff that was trying to be something, but it wasn't until way later that I started realizing let me start it this way. A while that went on for a while, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do, but then my friend who I was talking about who was playing jazz went away to college, and I started hanging out with his brother of all people because we would meet up at the college I was going to for lunch, and then we started going back to his place and stuff, and it was a familiar location to hang out, and it was really close to the school. We were hanging out, and he started making techno music, or what he called techno music at the time. He's like, I'm making techno, and I'm like, what the hell? Like, what are you talking about? Because to me, electronic music was like Eiffel 65. Like, I didn't understand electronic music.
Yeah.
I didn't know how it was made. I didn't know really what it was. And at this point, it's 2010. And my only experience really with electronic music was a giant folder of drum and bass that someone gave me in grade 11, which is actually pretty dope. It was some pretty good classic songs, and I was super into it. I liked drum and bass a lot.
Yeah.
But again, had no idea how to make it. Eiffel 65 was like my other idea. And then random dubstep that people showed me. And this is actually hilarious.
Because that's kind of when it started to rise a little bit around that time.
Well, yeah, so that's kind of what happened is my guitar player in like grade 12, he started getting into sort of like dubstep stuff, and like he stopped really caring about like metal music, and like he was playing more jazz on guitar than anything, but he was showing me a lot of dubstep. But he explained it like this. He said, yeah, you have to listen to these hour-long songs and find the good parts, and that's how you like get music for like dubstep and stuff. So he's like trying to show me a song, and he's bringing up people's sets and like fast forwarding to like a certain point, and he's like, this part's so cool, and I'm like, how do I listen to that? And he's like, you don't, like, it's just in the set. And like I'm like trying to figure out how to listen to like a song, like one song, and he's like, no, they're all like 2 hours long. And I'm like, this can't be right. Like, so anyway, that's what I thought dubstep was. Is dubstep was
early on?
And I'm
yeah.
like, I'm thinking like the way that they make it is like other people listen to other people's long ass sets, and they just like kind of like basically what we do, except instead of like just playing out track to track, it's like part of set to part of set, and people are just using multiple sets. I'm like, how did they make the first one? Like,
yeah.
Anyway, I didn't think too much about it, or that it was something that I could do.
Yeah.
But
you met
anyway,
this friend who was doing techno.
Fast forward, yeah, and I go to his house, and he opens up Ableton, and I'm like, whoa, that looks like a DAW. That looks like it's the same as Sonar, except it's backwards. All the tracks are on the right instead of the left.
Yeah.
So, and then he starts playing some music, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And he's like, oh, it's Electro House, and I'm like, Electro House, like, what? I'm expecting to be like techno, like just like actual like warehouse techno, like my bad idea of what techno is back in the day.
Yeah.
And so he plays that, and then he starts showing me music, starts me like Zed, and I remember it was Zed's remix of Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites, and I heard it, and I was like, holy shit, like
this is a whole nother
sound
world.
is huge, like it's absolutely huge. It is just as big, if not bigger, than like metal, because we've got a huge frequency range. The complexity of it is so much more complicated than anything you could ever do on an instrument, like the way that the sounds are, because it was Complextro at that point. That was what.
Oh
like,
my god, that shit was, there's so much going on.
Oh yeah, so like I literally an instant music boner. I was like, whoa, like, and then he's like, yeah, and they make it with this program. I'm like, hold on. So you're telling me that one person can sit in their room, use this program, and create music that sounds that good?
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about paying for expensive microphones. You don't need to mix things on a mixing board. You don't need to learn a bunch of things on a bunch of different. I'm like, my brain is exploding at this point. I'm like, oh my god, like I can do it. This is the thing. I can use it. Holy shit! And so I'm like, I have a fucking orchestra at my fingertips, and he's like explaining to me like how you like do automation, like because that was something that I never knew about at all, because I didn't even get that deep in Sonar. I thought you just put the effect on and that was it.
You're good.
I had no idea. I thought you had to like do it live or something. Like I like record it out and like move knobs. I don't even know. I didn't think about it.
You just didn't think about
it.
He's
like, yeah, you just click on this and like you just draw this line, and when you play it, that knob will move. I'm like, holy fuck, like that's crazy. Like you could do anything. You could move any knob and make any sound turn into any sound. He's like, yeah, basically. I'm like, ah. So
a whole new world.
That was the day it like opened the can of worms. I was like, fuck. So I went home and I instantly like got it right away, and I started going in and I started turning knobs, and I'm like, how do I make this sound? I started looking at YouTube tutorials and like just watching tutorials, like everything, like figuring it out. I was like, oh, what's a plugin? Oh, cool, like sweet. So like this is what plugins are. I started looking for plugins, start downloading samples, and I remember we were using this really bad sample pack that he had, and like all the drums in it were just like so trash. There was the worst good at all, like so bad. And then one of my friends' brothers was a producer who was like older, so he had some shit, and he's like, here, let me hook you up. And he gave me the Vengeance sound pack. And I was like, holy shit. I started going through these, and I'm like, whoa, these kicks are huge. Like these kicks actually sound amazing. Like they're so big and fat. And I'm like, dude, this is insane. I took it over my buddy's house to show me. I'm like, here, take all these samples. And he's like, oh, I don't need any more samples. And he starts going through these. He's like, holy fuck, like these are really good, right? So we started making like music with samples, and we started looking for VSTs, and
that whole can of worms opened up. Yeah. It's funny.
Everything.
That parallels, like the way you described that is so similar to when you described when you first heard a drum, and then it was like, okay, all I need to do now is like get a drum kit and then learn and then go and go. It's funny how those two kind of stories paralleled for you. It's like first was the drum kit, and then once you had kind of that base of music, then you now moved into like listening to electronic music, and obviously that just opens an entirely new world.
Well, exactly, because at the beginning, I needed to find something that I could play.
Yeah.
Found drums, find that I could play it. And then I needed to find a way to make full music, found people, and then that stopped working. And then I was like, I need a way to make music still. So I learned the other instruments. I learned bass, I learned guitar, I relearned piano. And then I was like, no matter how hard I tried playing all the instruments, being a one-man band, there was no end result that I could see that I'm like, how am I ever going to perform this? Like, how am I ever going to, like, am I really going to make it as a one-man producer thing? Like, is it even a thing? Like, it sounds like a joke. Like, I'm not a monkey. So anyway, as soon as that last step, like I saw Ableton and I was like, I realized that real music production was a thing. Like, you can actually produce music like on your own, like using tools that are actually available to you. Like, that was it, man. That was when my musical, like,
so everything took off.
Identity skyrocketed.
Yeah, well, it's crazy because like that we have really definitely, like we were saying earlier, we really have different, like our upbringings are totally different in terms of how we were introduced to music. I think in the beginning we both have that foundation of piano, and we kind of had like a base learning of that. But it's interesting how you came to a DAW being like, okay, now I can finally record all these ideas. Like, I have all these things that I want to get done, and now you have the ability. It's now a tool you can use. Whereas for me, I just like sat down like, oh, look at GarageBand. It's an application on my Mac. I give it a try, and I started messing around with it. But it's crazy you started back in Ableton in 2010. No wonder you have so much experience.
Well, it's I mean, I think it was 2011 when I started using Ableton.
Okay.
But yeah, it's just funny thinking back to it because the way I was comparing it to what you were telling me is that you're like kind of the opposite, where you're like, music is like kind of cool, but it doesn't really matter. Like, I dabbled, but it didn't really like care or stick until you started finding music you could collect, and then you collected music, and then you still didn't really think about like making music until all of a sudden you found the program, right? Is that kind of what you said?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have music in my head and whatnot, but when I found Logic, I mean, obviously I started with Logic. I didn't switch to Ableton until 2016 when I met you. You're the one who basically said, why the hell are you using this program? I was like, I don't know, it's what I learned. And I mean, early on, people were always like, oh, you can never switch DAWs. Once you choose it, you're stuck in it for life. Which is like, that. Like, there's so many people that used to say that.
It's like kind of true, though. Like,
I think it took me probably a month to be better producing in Ableton than it did to be producing in Logic. That, to be fair, Logic has a ton of limitations, especially, I don't like the workflow. It's very much like a tracking workflow. It's more of like you're recording a band. I don't think from an electronic standpoint, Ableton just is much more capabilities. And luckily I had you to basically teach me. So, I relearned Ableton very quickly because I've only been using it for probably 3.5 years now.
Yeah, they're not even that much different, to be completely honest. Like, they're just like, the Logic is just like, the menus are just more complicated to find. It's just like not as fast that way.
Well, the way the macros work,
oh,
and
yeah, that's Ableton's specialty.
And that's really what for me is so important, to be able to simplify things, because in Ableton it's just, Live is just too complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny. I think it was I'm glad we did this episode, because like this is...
Okay, hold on. Let me just finish the thing I was going to say. It's just because the reason why I was mentioning that is the difference between the way that we came about it is it's like you seem to have stumbled into it and then enjoyed it. And then like once you found it, obviously you're like, I like production, and you dug deeper. Like, everyone gets to a point where you start digging on your own. Yeah. But it's not like you started with the intention of that. Whereas for me, from the beginning, I was looking for a way to do it. I was like searching for it. Yeah. And finally found it, right? And then when I found it, it was like I finally got this piece of me that was missing all along. Whereas you were like, I didn't know this piece of me was missing until I found it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I definitely stumbled onto it, and it's just, and now I mean, I feel like I spend a lot of time in a DAW or whatnot. But it's, and like you're saying, I've found interests in like down musical avenues. Sound design is a great example that. Nobody in my family has even, it's not like I was introduced to it in any way. I just basically looked into it on the internet. I met you, and now I'm making the most terrible square waves you've ever even heard of. It. Like, it's, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can break this plugin. Like, what? It's interesting how you kind of follow this track down and you end up where you end up.
Yeah, oh, it's dude, time is nuts.
Yeah.
Everything is crazy,
Yeah.
but we got here. That's all that matters.
Yep. That's really interesting. Well, we should definitely do some more specific dives back down later on, because there's definitely more that I wanted to talk about in terms of like there's specific points where I like had time in my head, like I want to ask this, but I don't want to interrupt the train of thought. So
Okay,
I
word.
I wrote a couple of those down, so maybe we'll follow up on those, not right away,
Sweet.
but at some point we can. It's just another idea to talk about. So
All right, that sounds good.
I think on that note, I mean, there's really that was a pretty good
That was a good session.
good
I learned
session.
a lot.
Thanks for listening, and
I'm Mike Zone.
I'm Joel Pod. We'll catch you in the next one.
Peace.